Hello, romance book lovers. Welcome to Tales from the Heart. I'm Jenna Harte, and each week I post new episodes from my stories of crime and passion. Right now we're listening to Old Flames Never Die, Book 2 of the Valentine Mysteries. This week is Episode 9, Chapter 14, where Jack returns. If you'd like to read along or get ahead in the story, you can get Old Flames Never Die from your favorite ebook retailer or save by buying direct from me. You can visit jennaharte.com/Valentine for all the details. Now, Old Flames Never Die is the second book in the Valentine Mystery series. If you missed book 1, Deadly Valentine, you can listen by checking early episode postings, or if you'd like to read it, you can get Deadly Valentine for free at my website, jennaharte.com. Now, Tales from the Heart is posted to podcast platforms and YouTube each week. These episodes are edited to censor out intimate content. If you'd like to have a version that includes the spicy bits, plus get early access to the episodes, behind-the-scenes information about stories, bonus content, and more, join me at Ream Stories. You can learn more at reamstories.com/Jenna Harte. Now, never miss the mystery of romance by hitting the subscribe button, and remember that all the details and links you might need are just a click away in the description. Now snuggle up, get comfy, and enjoy the show.
Chapter 14. Jack focused on the road ahead and tried to figure out what he was going to say to Tess. He knew it was wrong for him to leave town without telling her. He knew that she was aware that he'd left town, thanks to Brad, who told him that Mrs. Stauffer had taken a call from Tess. He checked his voicemail and heard the stress in Tess's voice in her last message. He should have called her sooner, but Cora hid his phone, wanting nothing to disrupt their day together. Not that he couldn't have gotten it back. He was twice as tall, 100 pounds heavier, and nearly 50 years younger than her. He was sure he could have wrangled it from her, but she deserved his attention, so he turned off all thoughts of the drama in Jefferson Tavern and enjoyed the day. But now, as he neared the exit that would take him to Tess's hotel, he knew he'd been wrong not to call and wondered just how much damage he'd done. It was hard to tell with Tess sometimes. Her move to the hotel had been an unexpected and huge blow. He'd been sure she'd gotten over her insecurities about love and relationships. He'd been wrong. His silence over the last day certainly hadn't helped. Parking the car in the hotel's garage, he made his way up to her room, his mind in a whirl. He knew how to apologize, but he didn't know how to tell her all the other things going on in his head that he was sure she wouldn't like. In hindsight, he should have stayed away from Liv. But how could he when she'd been such a support to him when his mother died? Tess couldn't know how difficult the loss had been. It was like the foundation had been ripped out from under him. He probably should have gone to counseling, but the bottle and woman were easier. Finding Liv had been just as wrong as all the drinking, worse actually since she was married, but she'd somehow grounded him. And he could see that his needing her had given her something she needed as well. He hadn't loved her, but at the time, he needed and cared for her. It was more than she'd gotten from her husband. But even in a loveless marriage, Liv wouldn't have killed her husband. She'd have her affairs, yes, but cheating was a long way from murder. If she'd wanted out or needed help, she could have come to him just as she did after her husband's death. Jack took a deep breath and knocked on Tess's door. When she opened the door and smiled, tentative as it was, Jack's brain emptied of everything except wanting to touch her. He started to reach for her until he noticed the bandage on her temple. What happened?
I was about to ask you the same thing.
Her voice was wary, which scared him. He wanted her to be mad because it would indicate she was still invested in their relationship. Tess. He reached out, brushing his fingers over the bandage. She sighed and moved to let him in.
I had an accident.
How? Where?
In Bucks County.
Jack's concern morphed into annoyance. Bucks County? You took what I told you about the senator's interest in Liv's property and used it against her? Her eyes hardened.
Do you know how insulting that is? It's bad enough that you dismiss all my concerns about Liv. But now you think I'm incapable of learning about Charles Danforth's, not Liv's, property on my own. Or that I'd use you?
She turned away from him and went to sit on the edge of her bed. She looked exhausted, mentally and physically. All of a sudden, he felt like a bigger jerk than he already was. No, of course you're capable. I'm sorry. And I don't dismiss your concerns. Just because I don't agree doesn't mean I don't think your ideas have value. And while I'm apologizing, I'm sorry for not letting you know I went out of town or calling you back today.
Cora took your phone?
He nodded. But that's not an excuse. The truth was I needed some time away to think things through.
What things?
Jack moved a chair so he could sit near her and take her hands in his. Did you know that when I saw you again in February, I'd been planning to sell my house?
I remember you saying something about that.
But then I found you again and convinced you to be with me. He smiled weakly. Hers was just as weak back. The point is, the only reason I'm still in Jefferson Tavern is you.
Is it so bad here?
Right now, yes, the Worthingtons are sucking the life out of me and the town thinks I'm a cheater. He purposefully didn't mention the fact that she'd moved out on him.
And what about me?
I love you.
But you think I believe like the town does?
No, I think you know I haven't cheated on you, but you worry about it. And in the beginning, I suppose you had that right, considering your experiences in the past. But now, Tess, after all this time, you have to know how I feel about you.
I do. And I'm not worried that you'll cheat with Liv. Or anyone.
Jack shook his head. Then why was she here in a hotel? It made no sense.
I just don't think we're ready for that much commitment.
It was like a punch to the gut. He was 110% committed, but she wasn't.
We are still learning about each other, how to be around each other.
That's bull. She jerked back, and in doing so, her hand slipped from his. The only thing different in this new version of our relationship is that you're not at my house. We still see each other. Hell, we still have sex. The only thing we don't do is sleep in the same bed and wake up in the same house. How is spending every night together somehow too committed compared to everything else we do? He could see in her eyes that she was unsure of her own thinking, but that didn't stop her from advocating her point.
Take this thing with leave.
What about it? I thought you said you believed me.
I do, but ever since it started, we haven't been able to communicate. We just end up arguing over the same things. It's never resolved.
We can agree to disagree. She took a deep breath, and something about the look in her eyes told him she had a few unpleasant things to say to him.
I know that you're faithful. What bothers me is how easily you dismiss my feelings that she's bad news for you. You believe her over me.
I'm not choosing to believe one over the other.
Aren't you?
The tension snapped and anger took over. He stood and began to pace the room. So you want me to take your side just because we happen to be in love? I'm not a doormat, Tess.
No. I want you to at least consider...
Being in love doesn't mean we can't have differing beliefs or see things differently.
I know.
No, I don't think you do. I haven't once asked you to stop working with Daniel even though you know I don't like him. And I haven't asked you to take my side on this issue. Tess bit her lip and he thought he'd made his point.
I don't want you to do something against your conscience. I just don't understand why what she says has more merit than what I say.
It doesn't, he shot back. Why did she always have to question his love, his loyalty towards her? Tess, you have yet to present me with any evidence that makes me think she's involved.
My instinct doesn't count?
You, of all people, know that what you think doesn't mean anything if there is no proof. The so-called evidence you and Daniel have is even more circumstantial than what the police had when they accused me of killing Asa, and I didn't do it. I'm giving her the benefit of the doubt because she'd a friend, and I believe her.
We aren't in court, Jack. I shouldn't need proof with you.
The truth of her words sent a wave of guilt through him, but it wasn't enough to make him acquiesce. He'd done too much of that already with her, and he didn't like how it made him feel.
You don't trust me.
Trust? You don't trust me either. You think I'm so gooey-eyed over her that she'll lead me to who knows what. I'm not an idiot, Tess. I know Liv's shortcomings. I'm a big boy who knows the difference between right and wrong.
You don't trust that maybe there is something to my instincts about her.
I believe you see discrepancies in her story and think there is something to it. But that doesn't mean Liv's guilty. I'm sure your instincts have been wrong before. Her eyes went dark as they looked into his.
Yes, they have.
He knew she wasn't referring to Liv, and it felt like a stab in the heart.
Have some compassion, Tess. She just lost a baby, and now her husband. She may seem shallow, but she is a human being.
Tess stood, turned her back to him as she went to the restroom. He wondered if she was going to lock herself in. For some reason, it pissed him off even more. He followed and found her splashing water on her face. Last night, they'd made love over that sink. It felt like a lifetime ago.
I don't want to talk about it anymore.
Why? Because I won't drop to my knees and beg you to forgive me for believing Liv's story? Or is it because she's a woman I used to sleep with? Is that the problem, Tess? Every time her name comes up, are you imagining me in bed with her?
He saw surrender in her eyes and knew he should stop, but he forged on.
You want something from me, Tess, that you aren't willing to give yourself. At every chance you question my feelings for you. I'm willing to do just about anything to prove my love for you, but I'll be damned if I'm going to give up my own beliefs and sacrifice a friend just to appease your insecurity.
He'd gone over the line, but he was tired of being a schmuck. He'd gone this far, he might as well go for broke. He stepped towards her, invading her space. To her credit, she didn't shrink away.
Here's the deal, Tess. Either you love and trust me and know that I love and trust you, and you'll pack up your things and return home with me now, or you don't.
She didn't say anything, but she didn't have to. It was in her eyes. He shook his head, waited a beat just in case he was wrong. But she only stared at him.
Fine, I'm done.
He stormed away from her. A part of him thought, hoped, that she'd come after him as he headed out the door. He even let the first elevator pass, giving her a chance to come to her senses and grab hold of what they could have together. But she didn't come. She didn't even open the door to see if he'd really left. When the next car arrived, he stepped in. As the elevator dropped to the lower floors, so did his heart. He got in his car but couldn't go home to an empty house, so he drove. When he couldn't stand the solitude any longer, he went to another hotel. He took the elevator up and knocked on the door.
Jack?
Liv stepped aside to let him in.
Tessa's first instinct was to follow him and beg him to take her back. Her second instinct was to follow him and tell him to go to hell. But she didn't do either. At first, she was too stunned to move. Then numbness paralyzed her. Was it over? Had he left for good? Or was this just another spat and he'd be back? It was another indication that there were issues between them. An ultimatum wasn't the solution. Still, she knew that she was part of the problem. Telling him she didn't want to talk about it contradicted her goals. She also understood that it probably did feel to him like she was stepping away from the relationship. But why had he reacted so strongly? Jack was an emotional man, but this seemed over the top for him. They frequently butted heads, and lately, every time they did, it caused cracks in their relationship. And it was always about Liv. Tess wondered if maybe he was right, and she was insecure. Or did he still have feeling for Liv that he didn't admit to? Either way, the result was the same. He'd left, and Tess felt the emptiness of her life overwhelm her. How could love so completely devastate a person? It angered her that it could. She was a strong, independent woman alone in a hotel room with her heart shattered in a million pieces. This love thing was more hassle than it was worth. Sure, the good times were good. Okay, spectacular. But the lows were too painful to bear. Why she'd ever let him talk her into believing in love again was beyond her. Now might be a good time to leave and start over, again. Let Liv get away with murder or worse, get Jack implicated. She could take her nest egg or even access her trust and go somewhere else. She was intelligent and resourceful. She could start over in a new town. She'd done it before, more than once. She could do it again, as soon as she had the energy to pick her heavy heart off the floor. If she didn't die of heartache, she'd rebuild her life. Except she didn't want to rebuild her life. She wanted Jack. It's what she'd always wanted. Hadn't she second-guessed her decision to move out since the moment she showed up at the hotel? He'd been right that virtually nothing had changed in their relationship since she'd moved out, including finding a way to bridge the gap that was between them. Maybe he was right. Maybe the only way to work through it was to jump in and swim. Tess pulled her suitcase from the closet and began to pack. She hoped that she'd be welcomed at Jack's place with open arms.
Jack entered Liv's hotel suite. She frowned at him.
You don't look good. I think the minibar is stocked. Want a drink?
Yeah, sure.
Let's see.
She pulled a handful of little bottles out of the box-sized fridge.
Jack Daniels, Seagrams 7.
Whatever is easy.
He took the bottle she offered, ripped off the top and drank, letting the cool burn glide down.
Here's another one.
He took the second bottle and downed its contents, cursing it and himself for not being able to manage the pain in his chest. He sank onto the plush couch.
Only a woman can make a man look like you do. Did you fight with Tess?
Yes.
I was just going to order room service. Why don't I order enough for 2 and you can tell me about it?
Without knowing why or even caring, he nodded.
Good.
She smiled, holding his gaze for a moment, then picked up the phone to order food.
I'm going to get some water.
Jack headed to her bathroom, splashing water on his face. He looked into the mirror and didn't like what he saw. How could a woman bring a man to his knees so easily?
I hope you like salmon,
Liv said when he returned to the room.
Salmon is fine.
While we wait, why don't you tell me what happened?
I shouldn't dump this on you. You're having a tougher time than I am. What can I do for you?
He placed his hand on her shoulder. She brought her hand to cover his.
My circumstances are different. Charles and I didn't have what you and Tess have.
She cocked her head.
The fight was about me, wasn't it?
He turned away from her, going to the window, but not seeing the view.
Yes.
He turned back to her.
But you don't want to hear it. The funeral is tomorrow. Is there anything I can do?
No. Everything is set. Even Charles's son and daughter-in-law are here. So why don't you tell me about you and Tess?
Liv.
Really? I'd like the distraction. This whole thing with Charles is overwhelming. I'd like an excuse to forget about it for just a little while.
He studied her for a moment, trying to see what Tess saw.
It's complicated. It's not even really about you.
It may seem difficult, but all things worthwhile take work. Was she upset about the kiss?
No, she told me she felt discounted when I defended you.
He sank to the couch, his bones too tired to keep hip standing.
Is she right? Are you dismissing her?
Jack wished Tess was there so she could see how Liv was in many ways sticking up for her.
No, I believe she sees things about this case that are questionable. But that doesn't mean you had anything to do with it. As a lawyer, she should know that.
But she's not a lawyer, not in this case. She's a woman who loves you and is having to deal with her man defending a former lover to her. I wouldn't like that very much.
The knock on the door signaled dinner's arrival. Once the server was gone and they were seated at the table, Liv said,
What I don't get is how Tess can't see how much you love her. It's not very often a woman has a man as gaga over her as you are for Tess.
I'm not gaga.
Jack.
She gave him an amused smile.
You are so gaga. But it looks good on you.
It doesn't feel so good right now.
Jack looked down at the food but didn't eat it.
She shouldn't feel threatened by me. Even if I wanted to seduce you, which I do, I can see it would never happen. Even now when you are angry and hurt, you're hopelessly in love with her.
You don't want to seduce me.
Sure I do. I know.
She waved a hand to stave off his protest.
My husband just died, but he didn't love me. And you and I were pretty good together once. Enough to make each other feel okay for a little time.
It was true, but it wouldn't work now. They may have been okay, but not great. Not like he and Tess were great, and no one, including a beautiful woman like Liv, would be able to make him feel okay, except for Tess.
You don't love me either,
he said.
But I do care about you, and that is more than I can say for Charles.
She poured herself wine from the bottle she'd ordered with dinner. Jack shook his head when she motioned to pour him some.
This is the kind of talk that is getting you in trouble with the police.
Jack finally picked up his fork to eat. If anything, he needed the food to counteract the alcohol he'd drunk. His being at Liv's hotel was going to be bad enough, but if he lost control of his senses, it could be disastrous. He wondered how long it would be before Daniel called Tess to tattle on him.
Just because I had a loveless marriage doesn't mean I killed him. Our lives were loveless before we married. I had no reason to kill him now.
Do you think you could love again?
Jack felt certain he'd done irreparable damage to his relationship with Tess. Now he had to face the prospect of living the rest of his life alone. She shrugged.
I'm not sure I've ever really loved anyone. I did try to love Charles. Yes, I'd be open to true love if it exists.
Tess is afraid of love.
That's silly, considering she has you falling all over her. That's like saying you're afraid to quench your thirst when there is a tall glass of water begging to be drunk.
If you always ended up thirsty after drinking, you might. Tess grew up in a loveless home. Her parents were like Charles, cold and unloving. She was engaged until she caught her fiancé in bed with someone else.
Ouch.
It was work to get her to take a chance on me. The fact that she did tells me that she loves me.
So what happened? Why'd she break it off?
Liv sipped her wine.
I got angry and gave her an ultimatum. She chose door number 2.
So her fear came true again?
Jack stopped in mid-bite.
It's my fault?
You gave the ultimatum, you gambled and lost.
I offered her forever and she didn't take it.
Liv laughed.
It's all or nothing, huh?
At this point, yes.
And what point is that?
He sat back and stared at Liv. He'd come with anger and hurt. Now Liv was adding guilt. She gave him a sympathetic smile.
Look, she didn't make the decision you wanted, so why not stay with me? You have no ties.
He frowned.
Except that you still love her. You should go back to her. You're acting like it's over, but it isn't.
I can't go back. As long as she is focused on this case, we're going to butt heads even when we try not to.
If you don't have anything to do with me, then you'd have no reasons to butt heads. Stop defending me to her.
It's not right that I have to give up my convictions just to make her feel more secure. Besides, you helped me. I can't abandon you.
Liv took a sip of wine.
It's your choice. You can be noble or you can be happy. But I don't need you so much that it's worth your losing Tess.
That wasn't the impression she gave during all the calls over the last week.
I do love her. God, how I love her. But if I give in on this, what next? I can't spend my life trying to prove my love to her. At some point, she needs to trust.
He leaned his forearms on the table and looked at Liv.
She didn't even try to stop me from leaving.
Liv gave him a sad smile.
I guess everyone has their limit. There were times I wanted to give up on Charles, and then he'd make some little gesture, and I'd think, maybe now he'll come around. Maybe now he'll love me. But he never did. I guess now he never will.
What do you think happened?
I don't know. There are many people who could have wanted him dead. I suppose me included.
Like who?
My first thought was his partner, although it would have been easier for him to kill Charles in a hunting accident.
Why him?
Jack asked.
He and Charles were building some development down in Bucks County. But at the last minute, Charles halted all the work.
Do you know why?
Jack wondered if Tess knew why. Didn't she tell him she'd just been down to Bucks County?
No, Charles never really talked about business or anything with me. But Charles couldn't stop it all on his own. They're partners.
He wondered if he should ask why the senator was interested in the land as well. Liv shrugged.
I don't know. All I know is that there is no building going on, and Wilson wasn't happy about it.
Jack's brows pulled together.
Weren't they supposed to go hunting together the day he was killed?
Fishing. But they often were at odds and would somehow remain friends.
What about other family members? Doesn't he have an ex-wife?
She wouldn't bother. The only person who really has anything to gain would be his son Kevin. He'll inherit most everything.
Were they close?
Charles wasn't close to anyone, including his son. Not that they fought. Charles treated him like he treated everyone else. He was indifferent.
He's here for the funeral?
Yes, but more likely he came for the will. He has a fondness for the good life.
Is he in debt?
She swirled the wine in her glass.
I don't know. I doubt it. His allowance from the family estate is pretty hefty.
Liv, have you told the police about all this?
I told them, but I don't know if they have done anything about it.
Jack shook his head. He remembered how the police focused on him to the exclusion of other viable suspects during Asa's murder investigation.
Hopefully they're looking at other options.
I try not to think about it. Right now I need to get through the funeral and the gathering afterwards. It will be at the house, if you'd like to come.
I'll do whatever you need.
I don't want to cause any more problems for you and Tess.
If it wasn't this, it would have been something else.
Isn't that why Tess had moved out in the first place? This issue had brought to light that they didn't know each other well enough and had difficulty communicating.
Funny how we ended up loving people who are difficult to love.
Tragic is more like it, thought Jack.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode from Tales from the Heart. I hope you enjoyed it and that you will be back to find out what happens next. Is Jack and Tess's relationship finished? And what's going to happen with the investigation? Now remember, you can listen to full uncensored episodes over at reamstories.com/Jenna Harte. And if you'd like to read along or get ahead in the story, you can get Old Flames Never Die from your favorite ebook retailer or save by buying direct from me. All the details and links you might need are just a click away in the description. Now don't miss the next episode. Hit the subscribe button so you'll know when it's posted. Thank you for listening again, and until next time, this is Jenna Harte wishing you peace, love, and happily ever after.